Outreach calls are the most profitable acquisition channel in B2B, at least if your business ticks certain boxes. So it's no surprise that the majority of startups and scale-ups are betting big on this channel to quickly grow their business. In this video, we'll look at exactly what outreach calling is, compare it to other classic digital marketing acquisition channels, and most importantly, I'll tell you precisely in which situations outreach calls are the most profitable channel. I'm Antoine Tarot, co-founder of Sendo and B2B Ninja. I'm an expert in B2B lead generation and go-to-market engineering. And here, I'm sharing my expertise and the lessons I've learned over the past 10 years as a marketer and as an entrepreneur. All right, let's get started. So, what exactly is cold outreach? Basically, cold outreach is when you stop waiting for prospects to come to you and instead take a proactive approach to lead generation. Cold outreach, cold outbound, it's the same thing. It's the same concept. Of course, it depends on everyone's definitions. Sometimes people will put cold outreach into a slightly broader category called outbound. In both cases, there's this term outreach or outbound, which means it's outgoing. So you're the one reaching out to your prospects, not the other way around. The opposite is inbound marketing. The second word in this concept is cold, so it's a cold approach. That means you're reaching out to prospects in an unsolicited way with whom you've never had any interaction before. In most cases, even though there can be some slightly intermediate approaches where you might have warmed them up beforehand or had other points of contact, overall, it works even if they don't know you at all, they've never heard of you, and you're completely using a cold approach. So of course, it's more complicated to spark interest and to build trust, but that's exactly where, with the right practices, you can still succeed. It works, even if you're coming in completely cold, and that's also the beauty of this channel. So as we can see on the slide, to speak concretely, in cold outreach, we're going to use all these channels. Potentially, when I say all these channels, I don't mean all at the same time. It's just that potentially we have all these channels at our disposal in our toolbox. The classic channel is email, used in the form of cold emailing. And don't confuse it with email marketing or anything that looks like a newsletter. It's not the same thing at all. The second channel, also very common, is using LinkedIn. And here, I'm really talking about LinkedIn's native features. I'm talking about connection requests, invitations on LinkedIn, and the chat. Once you're connected, I'm not necessarily talking about, in fact, even though it can definitely be used as well, the in-mails, which are those well-known sponsored messages, which you can send to people you're not connected with on LinkedIn, as long as you have a paid premium option on LinkedIn. But actually, we're less interested in that than in the natural messaging, the LinkedIn chat. Next, we have cold calls. Obviously, with that, there's no way to automate this channel, and you need to have the ability. Either it's one of your skills or you have colleagues who are capable of making cold calls. It's not an easy exercise, but it can be extremely effective. Today, we also have the possibility to send SMS or WhatsApp messages, and especially the WhatsApp channel, which is increasingly being used even in B2B. And we also have postal mail with services that even allow you to personalize the letters. In the same way that we can personalize everything digital, like for example, an email. So those are the main channels we can use. Now, I'll add two more for your information, which are a bit less well known, but have appeared in some outreach calling software. The first is using voice messages on LinkedIn, a bit like we're used to doing on WhatsApp with our friends and family. There are different approaches. You can record truly specific messages for each prospect by hand, or nowadays, there are also solutions that use AI to personalize audio variables in the messages, and depending on the quality of the message, that can also be interesting. On the phone channel, we've also had, for a long time, software that allows us to leave voice messages on the traditional classic answering machine to our prospects' phones without having to make a call and without the phone ringing. This also allows you to deliver voice messages in bulk directly to phones, and that can be interesting. So you see, we have a whole plethora of tools, but the common point every time is that it's us sending an outgoing message. And the challenge, of course, is going to be managing to capture the attention of this cold prospect. The method I'm presenting to you here basically summarizes the overall approach to cold outreach. We actually start by doing B2B targeting, where we go on LinkedIn or other platforms to identify contacts who fit our target, using criteria based both on profiles and on accounts. That is to say, the companies. We also have an entire strategy that allows us to detect buying intent signals, which I won't go into detail about today in this video. From all this data, we use scraping bots to collect thousands of data points in just a few minutes. We then enrich this data, especially to find the contact details that interest us. And then we run this through software that automates outreach, which creates campaigns. at regular intervals with configured delays. This allows us to send messages, emails, messages on LinkedIn or other channels we've discussed, and it automatically handles follow-ups to maximize results in the end. The goal is not to pitch, but to spark enough interest by highlighting a potential problem for our prospect so that we get a positive response like, okay, I'd like to know more, okay. To set up a video call on a certain date, here are my availabilities. Now we're going to talk strategy. And specifically, I'm going to try to describe to you in which scenarios do you find yourself? In which situations does it make sense to use outreach calls as an acquisition channel? I'm going to try to remain objective, even though, of course, outreach calls are my specialty. And I'm going to compare this to other classic digital marketing acquisition channels to see in which situations and with which business models you would benefit more from choosing one channel over another. So I'm using this chart that outlines the different business configurations you can have depending on the ACV, which stands for annual contract value. It's kind of like the average basket size, but over a year for each client. So it's the value you'll get from each client over the course of a year. So actually, if you want to make €1,000,000 in revenue, we can consider that all these options are available to us. That is, if I'm at the very bottom of the chart, we're selling something for €1, I need to reach 1,000,000 customers. If I sell something for €10, I need to reach 100,000 people and so on. You get the idea. If I sell a service that is billed on average at €100,000 per year, I only need 10 clients, convince 10 business clients to make 1,000,000 in revenue. And then if we're talking about an ACV of 1,000,000, one client is enough. Depending on the type of business, we will favor one channel over another. So here, I'm showing you the main acquisition channels. We won't go into detail, but there are acquisition channels known as search, so with natural referencing, SEO, and with paid referencing, SEA, so with Google Ads, for example. Then there's everything related to social, so everything that relies on social networks. SMO is organic, SMA is ads, so that's advertising. Today we have influencer marketing. So we also have all the other types of ads, whatever they may be, display ads, video format advertising, YouTube ads, shopping ads, etc. Of course, there are also offline activities like events and trade shows, which in B2B can be very relevant in certain cases. Press relations and a whole range of other offline advertising options also exist. There are all the content strategies as well, such as content marketing, community building, and hosting webinars. And then, in this category that I call outbrand, we also find cold outreach. Cold calling, which I put in a slightly different category in its own class because it's not something you can automate and it requires a somewhat different skill set. ABM stands for account-based marketing. We'll look at in which situations it's relevant, but in ABM, we consider that the approaches will be manual. It's actually semi-manual because we'll be able to collect and automate a certain number of things, a number of data processes and alerts. But after that, the approach will be carried out manually and therefore highly personalized by salespeople and the sales approach, which is somewhat included in what I'm presenting to you. The traditional way of prospecting with a manual approach, and so it is time consuming. So if we apply the main acquisition channels to this matrix I showed you earlier, you see the bars, which represent the sweet spots where these marketing acquisition channels are most relevant. So for example, when we're dealing with very low average baskets, ACVs below €100, well, actually, you need to reach so many people that you'll try to create virality. We'll try to achieve a cost per lead that is also very low. That's why we turn to SMO and SMA, meaning social networks, because otherwise we just won't make it. Then there's SEO, which actually has a fairly wide range of uses, even though in reality we won't be doing exactly the same SEO. If we're at the very top, we'll focus more on long tail and niche topics. And if we're dealing with lower value baskets, we'll go for very generic things. It's not exactly the same way of operating, but in any case, it's still SEO. Next, for Google Ads will have its sweet spot with medium-sized baskets, which are in the middle range, ranging from several tens of euros up to, after that, it can go up quite high. That's why it can reach baskets of up to 10,000 euros, but often it may lose profitability before reaching that figure. So when we get closer to higher average baskets, we move more and more towards so-called models. High ticket, meaning with rather complex sales. And that's why at this point, Google Ads starts to lose relevance because the search volume is no longer sufficient to really maintain effective campaigns. Because in fact, the sales cycle is long and complex and you can't just sell with one click. And because with Google Ads, you're targeting an intention, but you're not targeting the profile. And generally, with complex sales, it's necessary to connect with people who will be involved in the decision-making loop and with very specific people, in other words, the decision makers. When the average order value increases even further, you can then move towards the channel of events, physical events, trade shows, which can become profitable mainly with high ticket sales, because that allows you to network with decision makers. So there is an investment of time and physical presence, but it precisely allows you to build the trust that is often necessary to make high value sales. And finally, for situations where we're really dealing with high ticket sales, ABM can be considered. And so the strategy, which is also a go-to-market engineering strategy, will involve monitoring accounts, key accounts that we've identified, which are major accounts, and trying to identify intent signals, buying signals, or any data that allows us to personalize our approach and be extremely relevant, and to build a relationship of trust in order to move toward a sales cycle that can be quite long and fairly complex. So cold outreach really finds its sweet spot in this band of colors you see in front of us. We can use it for even higher average deal sizes. We can use it for slightly lower average deal sizes in a more mass market approach. But it's true that it works best in that particular zone. Why not higher? Because I often use the example of a company that manufactures jet engines for commercial airplanes. In fact, when you're a company that makes those, you have, as clients, it's Airbus and Boeing. So obviously you already know your clients and you don't need to automate your outreach. And you have a TAM, a total addressable market that's really very limited. Still, these are big companies. You could also say that within these companies, there are plenty of potential contacts who can influence the decision. So it's not entirely irrelevant to use outreach calls and to automate certain things. And you can also use automation more upstream to identify the signals I was talking about. But in any case, we will keep a human and manual approach for this scenario. On the other hand, as soon as you have a TAM that starts to consist of several thousand or even tens of thousands of companies and tens of thousands of contacts, it becomes extremely relevant to transform the traditional work of salespeople with a manual prospecting using modern cold outreach tools to automate, save an incredible amount of time, and thus multiply the results. Now, if we consider the other classic acquisition channels in digital marketing, I see a number of limitations. That's why I love cold outreach, and I'm going to explain that right now. In fact, social networks, we know they can be quite powerful. We know they can go viral, but it's a bit all or nothing. It's a bit like the influencer who breaks through overnight, so to speak. Because before that, they worked hard for quite a long time with results that unfortunately were very weak and kept them in a kind of invisibility. So there's always uncertainty about the results you get from social networks. It's a bit of a hit or miss situation. SEO isn't quite the same thing, but it's similar in that it's a very long-term approach. You'll get fairly weak results at first until the whole mechanism gets going, until the reputation of the domain becomes solid because it has enough backlinks, references, and so on. Today, we have the contribution of AI and therefore of indexing in LLMs, which changes things a little bit. And on top of that, in my opinion, it makes investing in SEO today a bit riskier unless, of course, you get support from experts. But in any case, that's public knowledge. Obviously, SEO is a long-term strategy. It takes at least about 12 months to get good results. Google ads and Facebook ads can be good alternatives. So Facebook ads, Meta ads in some cases can be relevant. In B2B, even though it's more often used for B2C and small baskets, small impulse purchases in general. But Google ads can be relevant in B2B with the drawback that it requires a fairly significant initial budget investment because you'll need to run tests and train the algorithm so that it puts you in front of the right people. And as we mentioned earlier, the drawback of Google ads when doing B2B is that you'll be targeting a search intent that is sometimes too generic and doesn't allow you to be selective when it comes to the profiles of the people. So you can't decide from the start that you'll only have your personas coming in. To put it simply, we can end up with tourists coming into our leads. Google ads? Overall, we often find that 2/3 of the leads are not relevant to us because they're not part of our target audience. They don't have a budget or their project doesn't exactly match the services or products that we sell and so on. And so this sorting process has to be done, and it's not insignificant. The biggest problem with this sorting is that it actually takes up a huge amount of your sales team's time. A salesperson's time is a salary, and that's what costs more than the tools or even the ad budgets. So sometimes you have to be very careful because it can be counterproductive if you don't have good leads coming in through this channel. And so overall, from my point of view, there are often issues of uncertainty regarding the results and the quality of the leads that we will be able to collect. Often, we only get feedback on this lead quality after a certain amount of time, since we have to wait for the sales cycle to play out. And the salespeople give us feedback based on whether or not they succeed in closing those clients. Another problem is that as soon as we invest in something, we all have this human bias. It's the trap of, so in English, it's called the sunk cost fallacy. So it's this cognitive bias that means from the moment we've invested something, whether it's time, money, reputation, etc., in something, it's hard for us to let go. It's hard to go back on it because it costs us. And we have this cognitive bias that tends to make us say, yeah, but actually, I've already invested so much in this that it would be a shame not to go all the way and not finish. And that can trap us in bad decisions. So obviously, what I recommend is that once you find yourself in the sweet spot we discussed together, you should use the outreach code. So if you're in B2B, if that's your field, in my opinion, it's definitely in your best interest. We'll look at the exact advantages, but compared to other channels, from my point of view, it's something that can be implemented very quickly, and you'll inevitably see results as long as you already have product market fit. And where you find yourself in the zone we just looked at earlier. And I'm not telling you it's something exponential, no, but it is something scalable. You can actually scale it as much as you want, and it's something predictable and consistent. So we're really dealing with something linear here. It's not an exponential curve that's going to blow up or not, like with social networks in terms of virality. Definitely not. But from my point of view, it's something you can rely on as an acquisition channel in a much more steady way. You see, outreach calls aren't magic, but when you're in B2B, your ACV is high and you need direct contact with decision makers, it's often the most effective channel for building connections. You can qualify leads without blowing up your budget. So if you think outbound calling is relevant for your situation, you're on the right channel. I talk about it in depth from every angle. If this video, which was rather theoretical, helped you see things more clearly, don't forget to give it a like. Usually I record my screen and guide you step by step to concretely set up campaigns that generate qualified appointments with your target audience. So these are more hands-on videos, so feel free to check out my other videos on the channel and subscribe. To finish, leave me a comment under this video to let me know which specific topic related to cold outreach you'd like me to cover in my upcoming videos, knowing that I release one every week. See you soon.